Sweet friends, hello and welcome to today's very special episode of Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? And today I have the exciting fortune of diving in with a new friend, Dr. Austin Perlmutter, when we are going to talk about why isn't everyone optimizing their brains? Right? And y'all hear me talk about the brain a lot, but in a very different context. So we get to go a little bit deeper into the science today. We get to talk about how really the brain is all there is. It's controlling every cell that is printed in our body and every decision that we make. So why on earth would we not be optimizing our brains? So Dr. Austin Perlmutter, thank you for being here today. I'm so happy to know you. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I'm really ready for this conversation. I mean, we talked a little bit beforehand about why this matters. And there's sometimes you say something matters because objectively it makes sense. And there's sometimes you say something matters because you feel it. And this is one of those that is both. It is objectively the most important thing. And I think if people really tap into asking themselves what matters, this is also the most important thing. So I'm really excited to dive in.
So I like to say when people are like, oh, Emily, I don't have time to meditate. I'm like, cool. Do you have time to feel like crap? Like the meditation is changing. Like we know now it's changing your white matter, your gray matter, the hippocampus, the corpus callosum. So if you don't have time to take care of the machine that is printing every cell in your body and making every decision, like what else are you doing with your time? So I'm so with you. Like this is something that we all need to be talking about. Why isn't everyone optimizing their brain? And so when did you start optimizing your brain? And what were you seeing in your patients that made you want to speak about this?
Yeah, well, I've had the luxury of having parents who cared a lot about brain health. And I guess by extension, their parents. So my father's father was a neurosurgeon. So he was all about the brain every day. My father is a neurologist. So he's all about the brain every day. And so when I was a kid, he was thinking about, well, what can I do for Austin to help optimize his brain function, trying to look at diet and other things, which is amazing. But like most kids, I think I didn't necessarily take that on, make that a part of my identity. And it took a while before I recognized that everything else is a surrogate. I'm going to come back to this point because I think it's absolutely fundamental to what we're going to be talking about today. All the things that we care about in life, the money, the heart disease, they're all surrogates for the only thing that matters, which is what's happening in our skulls, how we think, how we act, how we feel. I've had the privilege of getting to be with people at the end of their lives, asking them questions about what mattered to them. I've had the opportunity to ask many people in extended circles about what matters to them. And I think it takes a little time to get to the real answer. People say, well, I want to grow a 6-figure business. Okay, sounds great. Why? And if you keep asking that question of why, eventually you get to the point of saying, because I want to be happy. I want meaning. I want fulfillment. I want contentment in my life. And all that is the question of how is your brain? How is your brain set up? But I want to go back to your actual question, which is, why did this become so important for me? So I did conventional medical training, 4 years of medical school, and then residency after that. And there was something that I experienced that unfortunately is the reality for so much of the medical profession, which is poor mental health. Doctors kill themselves at rates twice as high as the general public. We know that rates of depression and anxiety in doctors and trainees are dramatically higher than other professions. And I experienced some of that. My mood was not good. I was stressed, I was burned out, and I was feeling depressed symptoms. And so I had to have this moment of recognition of what actually matters in my life. And I was lucky in that I found an outlet that really did some amazing things, which was nature exposure. So I've become since then a major proponent of this idea of vitamin N. It's something that we all have a deficiency in. Turns out to be directly correlated with brain health and mental health. But as that journey progressed and as I made my way through training, talked to my patients, talked to my colleagues, I realized that the thing that was behind it all was brain health. And we were almost exclusively ignoring that topic until things got so bad that there was no other option than to see a doctor, get a prescription, see a therapist. Now, we live in a healthcare system where we have basically said it is okay to ignore your health until things get so bad that you need acute, urgent medical care. I can't tell you how many people didn't care about their heart health until they've had a heart attack, didn't care about their brains until they had a stroke, didn't care about their mental health until they needed a diagnosis of depression and getting a prescription for that. But when it comes to the brain, these are issues that are intrinsic to life. Like life is the experience of what's happening within our brains. And it is such a strange thing that the only time that we think about this, for the most part, is when things have gotten so out of whack that we need somebody outside of us to give us a pharmaceutical to try to bring things back into whack.
I was just talking to a man this morning, and I did an activation, and afterwards he said, I'm a pharmacist,
Yeah.
but I was having people feel into their dreams. Like, what's your big dream for yourself and the species? And he's like, actually, my dream for the species is that the pharmacy of the future is you come in and we activate your internal pharmacy. I was like, yes, I love that an actual pharmacist is relying on and celebrating what's possible with our internal, pharmacology.
But let's get into that for just a second, because I want to be as clear as I can on this point. If you look at what conventional medicine does, there are some preventive measures, right? So we screen for certain types of cancers. We might look at a cholesterol panel. We might look at a blood pressure recording. But by and large, the majority of healthcare dollars and disability is concentrated into the people who have chronic diseases that are going to last them for the rest of their lives. Most Americans have a chronic disease. Most Americans are taking one pharmaceutical. The default option is to do nothing until things are so bad that there is nothing else to do but seek care. This is, in essence, the same strategy as ignoring the warnings and waiting until the hurricane eye wall is tearing your house apart and saying, you know what, maybe we should have evacuated, or maybe we shouldn't have built this house out of straw. And I would say, unfortunately, the scenario is this way because every system that is in place does a great job capitalizing on what happens once you're sick enough to need that care. So what I would advocate for here is the idea of saying the most powerful thing that you can do today is to take ownership over your brain. And that requires an understanding of the external forces that are doing their absolute best to own your brain, to have you make unhealthy decisions that compound over time and get you into this death spiral where you wake up every day, your brain's in a bad spot, you're feeling anxious, you're making poor decisions, but you're giving your money and your time to the companies benefiting from your brain being in a bad spot.
Whoa, so can we just name some of them? Like, I'm assuming it's social media, it's advertising, pharmaceuticals, like what, can we just dive into that?
Let's go into that.
Did you know that the best way to support this podcast is actually by joining our email list? Ziva Meditation is the sponsor of Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? This is my baby. This is what I've been doing for the past 13 years. And if you go to zivameditation.com/email, then you're going to be the first to be notified when we drop a new episode. You're going to get invited to free live teachings. And this is also where I share my most recent and my most profound transformations. So I'm going to invite you to go to zivameditation.com/email so that you never miss our offerings, get invited to free events, and you'll be the first to know about our retreats and our courses. So zivameditation.com/email is really where the party's at. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for making this podcast such a success. It is a delight to share these guests and these teachings with you.
As I think about the things that are most driving our brain state, I look at what is it that we are consuming? What is the quality of what you are consuming? And this has largely been described in the context of food. We say, what is the quality of the food that you're eating? Are you eating omega-3s or omega-6s? Are you eating foods with a lot of added sugar, or are you eating real foods, right? So we know that quality matters. And it matters because when food is digested, it changes your microbiome. It changes the structure of your brain. It changes the neurochemical pathways within your brain. It changes the way that they are wired. So all of these things certainly factor in. We can talk about some of the bigger themes that I think are absolutely destroying brain health as it relates to what is in our food, what is in our beverages. But it's really important too to think about that so much data that you consume in a given day is not through your mouth, but it's through the air that you breathe, which very few people are paying attention to, is one of the top toxic sources of what is going into our bodies and influencing our brain. Air fresheners, we can get into that.
No, let's please get into
disaster.
it. Like I abhor air fresheners, perfume. Like I want to eradicate them from the planet.
Let's just pause on this for one moment. So we go to the grocery store, we probably heard some version of, you want to shop around the outside because that's where the produce is. Don't go into the middle aisles because that's where the processed food is. I think the most toxic part of the grocery store is the air fresheners section.
Thank you.
Because if you actually think about what you're doing, you are literally generating toxins in your environment that are known brain toxins, known toxins to the rest of your body.
And carcinogenic.
This is the truth of it. It is absolutely a underappreciated piece of this puzzle. They're just literally poisoning your environment.
I think today Dr. Pedram Shojai was like, oh, smells like cancer. And I was like, we need t-shirts to be like, oh, this smells like cancer.
Well, it is the case that many of these produce things like formaldehyde, toluene, benzene. These are known carcinogens. And so that is true. But I think what people tend to undervalue is that there are multiple air pollutants that are generated by these air fresheners, some of which are these VOCs, like the ones I just described, volatile organic compounds that have been linked to a host of health issues, some of which are particulate matter, basically tiny little molecules that have been now consistently associated with things like Alzheimer's, depression, worse cognition. But there was a study I was looking at, I know we're going on a tangent here,
I'm ready.
showing that people who were exposed to higher levels of these VOCs, which are basically what you're getting when you spray that air freshener, had worsened cognition in real time. We're not talking about 20 years from now, you're at a higher risk for developing cancer. We're saying you can't think clearly when you're breathing in poison, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's this huge industry that greenwashes this with things like natural and plant-scented. And the truth of the matter is, a majority of this is actually coming from chemicals, like petroleum. That's where these candles and things are coming from. And beyond that, these things are emitting a wide range of secondary chemicals, these VOCs, that are reacting in our environment with ozone and other molecules. And when we're smelling that, plug it in or whatever, I mean, we could list some brands here.
Plug it in.
You're plugging in poison.
Oh, preach it. Preach it. So if let's say people listening right now, like they should go and like remove those things and throw them away. Like throw out your air fresheners.
I'm a person who believes in moderation, who believes in finding the nuance, finding the middle ground. In this case, I'm not. Throw that stuff away. Yeah. Those little Christmas trees you see hanging in the car, please get rid of these things. I've looked at the studies. They're literally just destroying your environment. So almost everything in that air freshening section is going to be bad for your health. And I'm going to say that again. Almost everything there is going to be bad for your health. The scented candles, the plug-in things, the little ones that you pop up and they just kind of dissolve over time. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
You're literally just leaching that into your atmosphere. The sprays, the Febreze sprays, which I know, you see the commercial and there's a stinky house and they're putting that out there. Yeah, so you're not smelling, your kids' BO from when they went out and played sports. You're just breathing in poison. So you've got to be, aware of these things. I'm just going to go one step further on this, and I'm not sure your take on this, so I might be treading into some dangerous territory.
Let's see.
Some of the most concentrated sources of indoor air pollutions are incense, candles. So I'm not trying to say to people you can't use incense, you can't use an indoor candle, but you really need to be paying attention to what they're made of and ventilating. So these are things that, again, if you're thinking about what you're putting into your brain, we like to talk about food. That's great. We can get into that. But you also need to think about what you're taking in through your lungs. And the third category, I guess we could go skin, but the third major category is what you're taking in through your eyes and through your ears. The messages that you take in from your external environment, what comes in through your screens, what comes in through your radio shows, is a direct conduit to what's happening in our brains. And in an American public where we're spending upwards of 11 hours on media each day, 9 hours looking at screens, 2+ hours on our phones, 4+ hours watching TV, that is probably the most extensive source of all of these kind of unhealthy messages. Now, I will say, you breathe 20,000 times a day. So as far as reps go, that air that you're breathing is really important too. But if you're looking at the various things that you can do to actually protect and prioritize your brain, to optimize your brain function, I think these are the biggest buckets of things as far as what you're taking in.
Yeah, and with the air fresheners, it's so easy. You don't have to stop eating Oreos. You don't have to stop drinking wine. You could still watch your favorite TV show. It's just put that in the trash. And the stuff that you could use instead is so much cheaper. You could use vodka. Vodka and water will work better than Febreze. I used to be on Broadway, and that's what they would do with our costumes because they can't launder them every night because they're, $10,000 custom-made things. So they would spray them with vodka and water, vinegar and water.
Vinegar's great.
You're still going to be clean. You're not going to be stinky. You're still going to be breathing chemicals.
Usually, it is the case that if it smells nice, that's an unnecessary thing. It's an additive, and it's not good for your health. And I say that as somebody who enjoys many of these smells. But even the natural cleaners and things, if you're getting all of these intense odors, the lemon odors, the orange odors, there is some research suggesting that those oils may themselves not be good for our health.
And what about essential oils? If you're
we're going into some interesting territory here. Okay. So I would say, relative to some of these other things, I wouldn't be as concerned about essential oils. However, essential oils are air pollution. And it's not a fun thing to talk about because people will say, look, I want the natural version of these things. But essential oils do actually generate air pollution. These ultrasonic essential oil diffusers, when measured, they are generating high levels of air pollution. Now, what I will say is there's heterogeneity in what goes into those oils. Many of these essential oils, while they're deemed natural, are actually completely synthetic. So you're basically just burning chemicals. And it smells like lemon, but it's not, right? This is a synthetic
And do you
chemical.
mean like truly like a doTERRA, or like the people who pride themselves on like, we've wild sourced this and made it, like, do you think those too? Or is the ones you're getting from the grocery store, like all of them?
So it is a nuanced topic.
Okay.
What I would say is your best bet is actually to do something like put some herbs and spices and boil them on the stove. When we think about what we're breathing in, if you're breathing in essential oils, if you can smell them, you are breathing in VOCs. Those are the active molecules that activate basically these odorant sensors and allow us to experience that. Now, there's some really interesting nuance here. So there's some studies, including one that was just published, showing that essential oils given to people at night improved cognition. There are studies showing that people who smell essential oils have less migraine, less pain, a number of different outputs. However, those are more kind of short-term types of effects often. And I think where we need to be careful is in the spectrum of what we're doing, high exposures to these VOCs, whether they're natural, but especially if they're these synthetics, things like benzene, toluene, formaldehyde, probably not good for our long-term health. So I'd say this is one of the areas in which there's not a whole lot of clarity around the sourcing, but typically things that you're going to buy in that grocery store and the pharmacy, those are not the ones you want to purchase.
Right.
And I'll just put on that front, all these beautiful scented candles, you don't want to do that. Beeswax is a far superior option, and you want to make sure you're not generating a ton of smoke.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so low smoke and beeswax candles. Okay, this is so exciting.
Yeah.
All right, so already we have like great actionable things we can use. And so what I'm hearing is that obviously our brain health is like the most important thing. It's ultimately the thing that's responsible. Are we happy or not?
Yep.
Are we alive or not? It is the portal through which we are experiencing the entirety of consciousness. So what we ingest matters. So you're talking about what's on our skin, what's on our ears, what's on our eyes, what's in our nose. And then you were going to mention the companies that are profiting the most from us feeling bad and being anxious.
But let's just think about this for a minute. If you are a media company, you are incentivized to keep people's eyes on the screen. Now, you can do that in a number of ways. In theory, you could say, well, I want to provide people incredible educational content. And there's some of those out there. But if you're a social media company, your goal is to keep people scrolling. Your goal is to keep your advertisers happy, people clicking. And so I would look at this not necessarily as this hugely nefarious industry, the social media industry in particular, but a mindless industry. And I think something that is an incredibly important point to make is a huge amount of the cost is opportunity cost. What I mean by that is, as it relates to the food we eat, to the media we consume, it's not just that those things are toxic, right? I mean, it's easy to say Instagram is toxic, but the biggest problem may be what we're not doing because our eyes are glued to the screen.
Ooh.
We're not spending time with friends, we're not out in nature, we're not exercising, we're just basically putting our brains on autopilot. And one of the most consistent variables that we've seen from the research is if you want to think clearly and feel good into old age, what you need to do is stretch and exercise your brain. And I promise you, you're not doing that when you're spending hours a day seeing what so-and-so is posting on their Facebook or their Instagram. So the opportunity cost is huge. Same thing for Netflix. I enjoy Netflix. They have some great shows. But if you're spending 4 hours of your day kind of just binge watching series that you've already seen, you're not doing the stuff that is consistently correlated with better overall health and brain health.
Yeah, like spending time with friends, spending time with your
100%.
family, being in sunshine, being in nature. And so how would you recommend that we exercise our brains?
It's a really good question, and I don't think people are paying attention to this nearly enough. So brain, like the rest of the body, like our muscles, responds to exercise. What do I mean by that? Well, your brain, well, maybe your brain is special, but most adults' brains.
I like to think my brain is very special.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is everyone's brain is special because you have within your brain right now somewhere in the order of 80 billion neurons, which is a lot of neurons, right? Beyond that, these neurons are linked by these thousands of synapses. So in your brain right now, you have trillions of synapses. Now, if you think about this from a kind of a calculation perspective, and you say, every one of those is an opportunity, every one of those is potential, then with every moment of every day, you realize that how you think, how you act, and how you feel is a reflection of those connections, which are being modified by what you do.
How you think, how you act, and how you feel
Right.
are reflections of those 30 trillion or many trillions of
Correct.
synapses.
So if you hopefully know something today that you didn't know yesterday, have a feeling today that you didn't have yesterday, we kind of just think, okay, well, that's what life is. But if you actually ask why, it's because your brain is different. Your brain is different today compared to yesterday, and tomorrow you will have a different brain. This gets us to a whole question of who we are really, right? If our brains change, what is the me that perseveres between one day and another? But just for a moment here, your brain is absolutely dynamically changing with each passing moment. So there has to be this question of how am I changing my brain, for the better or for the worse? Am I the person in charge of that change, or is the overall environment getting to direct that change? Which, let me just tell you, is a disaster.
If the environment is changing your brain.
If you let the modern world be in charge of your brain, you will wind up in a bad place. And I can say that because statistically speaking, that is what the data say.
And what's bad place mean?
Well, look at where we are right now. There are hundreds of millions of people experiencing depression. There are basically billions of people experiencing stress and stress-related disorders. We've got 50 million people with Alzheimer's now. That number is going to triple in the coming decades. And what I'm trying to say here is beyond these specific disease conditions, brain health is bad for most people. And so if you accept that, just like you say, well, do I accept that 90% of people will have metabolic dysfunction and I'm just going to be one of them? If you accept that, fine. I would tell you, please do not. If you want to have a chance at the most meaningful, happy, and exciting version of your life, you want your brain on your team. Whatever happens in your romantic relationships or with your family, your brain's going to stick around. That's the partner you've got forever. Wouldn't you want to make that number one? And so, again, I got a little tangential, but to your question, how do you exercise your brain to keep it strong? The way you do this is to stretch it. Do things that make your brain a little bit uncomfortable. Learn something new. Get on stage and try a Toastmasters. My first time, so uncomfortable, I have to say. Even learning a new instrument or traveling. Doing crossword puzzles. These are all ways that you're stretching your brain. And the research consistently shows that people who do these things have better brain function that lasts them into their later decades. So not only are you creating a better brain today, but you're basically developing a partner that is going to be more solid in your life for the rest of your life.
So cool. And how about meditation? What are your thoughts on meditation? Do you think that that's a type of exercising the brain, or what do you think about brain health and meditation?
I mean, I would say meditation can be one of the most challenging and, I guess, stretching activities that a person can do. Now, you know this far better than I do. There are many types of meditation. There are many different ways that you can do this. It is a part of my day. I use it as an exercise primarily to get my brain into the state I want it to be for the rest of the day. So it's my main reset in the morning to try to level things out, get my brain calmed down. But when I've done longer meditations, things get really challenging. And so that is absolutely a form of stress on your brain, and I think a good form of stress on your brain. Again, you know this research very well, but when you look at the brains of meditators versus non-meditators, you can see the structural and functional changes. And it does seem like at a very basic level, meditation is something we can do that decreases stress. One of the most toxic things we know about for long-term brain health is chronic stress. So anything we can do to mitigate that is a good thing, and meditation seems pretty consistently to be one of the best strategies for lowering that stress. So I do look at meditation as a form of brain exercise. I think it depends on what you're doing. You know, a mindful walk, is it a brain exercise just like learning a new instrument? Probably not. But you do a full day of silent meditation, you are doing some real stretching of your brain and changing your neurons.
So it's interesting. So in this context, it feels like the stretching or the exercise would be something new or something challenging. And for you, it's like, oh, if I'm extending my meditation, that's a challenge, right? Whereas like the type of meditation that I teach is so effortless. Like it's based on something called Nishkam Karma Yoga, which means union attained by action hardly taken, lazy meditation. However, so even though, and I recommend people do the same sort of ritual every day. So it's like you're not changing, it's not expanding. However, I would make the argument that it is in fact healing because one, it is decreasing stress, but two, because more of the brain is lighting up, it's like you're changing the neural networks. Like you're out of just the fight or flight where the amygdala is lighting up or just the prefrontal cortex, and so the whole thing can light up. So even though it's lazy, even though it's restful, even though it's effortless, the brain is functioning in a different way. And so it's a type of exercise.
I think that makes total sense. I guess what I'm referring to in particular is this idea of cognitive reserve, which is helps to understand why people who have more complex jobs, who go on to get advanced degrees, may have a lower rate of developing conditions like Alzheimer's, because they built up almost more connections between the neurons. So they have some stability. Even if things kind of get a little bit worse, they have that reserve. And so these are some of the things that seem to be implicated in why puzzles, instruments, doing new and stressful things can actually build more of that, and why people who retire earlier may actually be at a higher risk for developing dementia. But what you're describing here, which I want to really emphasize the importance of, is that probably the best predictor of brain health is the habits we have each day. There is nothing that is a bigger driver of our actions than habits as it relates to a chunk of our daily activities. So if those habits are set up in a healthful way, you start your day with a meditation, you eat a healthful meal, you call a friend, and you do that every day. This is compounding interest for the brain. And this is what I really don't like about so much of the wellness industry and the health industry, which is whether it's the brain or weight loss or anything else, it's all predicated on this idea that you do it and it's going to fix everything, it's going to be really easy, and then 3 weeks later, everyone abandons ship. This is the New Year's resolution. This is why most diets don't stick. This is why people pay a ton of money for a new exercise program or a gym membership, and then a few weeks later, they never go again. This is a great model if you are trying to bring in new customers, because they pay you and then they don't follow through and they have to pay you the next year. But the wellness industry is predicated on people not being well. So it actually is a little disincentivized to provide the solutions that work, because then you can't have a new book the next year, right? You can't have a new program. If people are healthy, they don't need those programs, which as a participant in this industry, I understand. But I also understand that we are aware of, if you're really wanting to take control of your wellness and your brain health, you have to have, I think, a relatively higher degree of suspicion as to what are people's incentives for the messaging they're trying to give you.
I think that's why my business has not been global yet, is that it's truly, I preach and teach self-sufficiency. So it's like people take this 15-day training, it's 15 minutes a day for 15 days. And then when I'm like, you never need a meditation course again.
Yeah.
Like you can just do it every day, twice a day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And it fucking works.
There you go.
And then people are off into the wilderness. So it's not a great business model, but it is a great business model, because then it changes people's lives and then they want to bring their friends.
Absolutely.
So,
That's the right way to do it.
Yeah, totally. So I'd love to know a little bit more about what stress is doing to our brains.
Sure. So when we think about stress, what we're really saying is that your body has an unmet need, right? So a stress can be a psychological stress where you're concerned about, how am I going to do on that test tomorrow? There's this need to see resolution. And because there is a delta, a gap between where you are now and where you need to be, there is anxiety, there are feelings of, well, what comes next? And so that can be, again, in a psychological state, or it can be, your body's stressed because you're sunburned. You're actually stressing your cells. So that's the way the stress is used. Generally, when we think about brain health, we're talking about the psychological stress. But what's interesting is, our psychological experience of stress leads to biochemical changes and is actually driven by biochemical changes. So the basic loop here is something along the lines of, when you see, hear, or otherwise experience something stressful, that is person dependent, right? So some people are scared of snakes. Some people are scared of public speaking. Some people are scared of drowning. So different triggers for different types of stress. But let's just say you're walking down the street, you see a snake, you're in essence activating one of the most primitive loops in our limbic brain that says, okay, it's basically a bifurcation. Either it can go to the prefrontal cortex, where you have the ability to be logical and actually say, well, it could be a snake, and if it is, it's probably not a really dangerous one, and also I'm far away, and also I'll just turn around, it's not a big deal. Or it could go to this limbic loop, right? So bringing in the amygdala, where your body says, panic, overriding all the higher level systems. We've got a couple options. We're going to fight, we're going to flee, or basically freeze, right? If it goes down that path, and as it goes down this path, you're releasing a cascade of molecules that lead to production of cortisol, also norepinephrine, epinephrine. So you increase your sympathetic tone, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, and you liberate glucose, because your body's saying, if I'm going to fight, if I'm going to flee, and I guess to a lesser extent, if I'm going to freeze, I need to have these molecules available in my system, right? You need to get out of here. You need your cardiovascular system ready to go. You need the glucose to basically run that process. And that makes a ton of sense if you are facing a mortal danger. But 99% of the time in the Western world, people do not have to worry about an immediate threat to basically their life. They're instead worried about their 401k, job security, their relationships, climate change, right? And so these are things that don't get resolved. That delta, that gap, which is really the driver of these molecules revving up, never closes. And therefore what happens is you're perpetually activating these molecules in your brain and in your body. So what happens as a reflection of this? There's a couple of pathways that are worth knowing. One is, and this one is not usually discussed, is kind of the glucose pathway. So if cortisol is high, you build up excess glucose, you build up insulin resistance, and this can contribute to things like diabetes, as well as probably Alzheimer's disease, because we know that when metabolic health goes out the window, brain health tends to follow. And it might be a couple of decades later, but we know that type 2 diabetes is linked to a much higher rate of Alzheimer's disease, and in Alzheimer's disease, the brain is not as capable of processing glucose. So that is one potentially long-term effect of the chronic stress response in the body. The other one is talking more specifically about what happens when you have these molecules in the brain like cortisol. And what seems to happen is, in essence, you sever this connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Now, prefrontal cortex, probably the single most important part of the brain for higher level thinking. If you want to make a rational decision, you want to weigh the pros and cons of what you do, you want to take a beat, pause, reflect before you act. These are important things if you're in the modern world. The prefrontal cortex is kind of in charge of all of that. Then you have these more primitive structures, the amygdala being a good example, that are tasked with, again, stress response, emotional management. And when those two systems speak to each other, then the emotional processing is kind of tempered by the prefrontal cortex. So you don't just lash out in anger. There's a delay, there's a buffer. When that process breaks down, which seems to be the case in chronic stress, people start to experience more anxiety type symptoms, and they may not have the ability to kind of pause before they make important decisions. So long term, this is primarily animal, but some human data, there's actually been shown to be a decrease in the connectivity between those two regions of the brain. Interesting, meditation helps to kind of regain some of that connectivity so you can reverse it. We've thought about meditation as a good intervention for stress because it lowers cortisol, but maybe why it matters so much for brain health is because you're actually reconnecting regions of the brain that have been, to some extent, disconnected because of that cortisol. Wow. So the long story short is, chronic stress is a big issue, and we often only experience kind of the long-term implications of it and don't maybe make the connection as to, why is my mental health poor now? Why is my thinking not clear now? Why is my blood sugar all out of whack now? And it's driven by these chronic stressors that are very often these subtle things under the surface that just persist for decades.
Yeah, it's so beautifully articulated. And just to like bring this home, because this is something I talk about quite a lot with folks. And so what I'm hearing you say is that it's not only the like going into fight or flight in the now. Like I always say, stress makes you stupid, sick, and slow, and that's sort of obvious in the near term.
Right.
Like there's a reason why you can't find your keys when they're in your hand when you're rushing to get out the door, because your brain is in panic, like looking for the tiger. What I'm hearing you say is that over time that could actually lead to brain degradation or Alzheimer's or change of the way your body's processing glucose, which could lead to metabolic decline and then mental
100%.
decline. And then interestingly, what you were just saying is this idea of like the connection between the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function of the brain,
Exactly,
and the fear center, the amygdala. What I've always been excited about is that what we know is that meditation increases the connection between your dorsomedial prefrontal cortex and the insula, which is the empathy center, which basically means that you could be more empathetic towards people who we perceive as other or different. I just think that I'm almost seeing like two axes there, where there's like the front and the back, like the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, but then you also have the insula and the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, which is making you more empathetic. And then the other one is like, oh, do I actually want to engage in this reaction?
Right.
And when we have the ability for those to talk to each other, it increases something that I call adaptation energy, which is just your ability to adapt to a situation. And that, like to your point, it's like we always want to be adaptive. If it's time for sleep, we want to sleep. If it's time to fight, we want to fight. If it's time to create, we want to be able to create. But if our brain is not healthy, then how are we going to be able to adapt?
Yeah, and I love what you're saying too, because a lot of the idea behind this is to just regain control over your own life, right? And if you are lower in the Maslow's hierarchy because you're unwell, because you're looking for basic needs, you don't have the ability to think big picture. You don't have the ability to necessarily change your environment. And I think there are some of these things that are far bigger conversations than just about the food that we eat. Stress can come from a number of sources, some of which are kind of baked into the modern world that disproportionately affect certain populations. But I think that there is something really important to say about if your goal, whatever your goal might be in life, you want to be more successful in relationships, you want more energy, you want to be more successful in business, any of these things that you need, there's really only one important player, coach on your team. Everyone says, oh, you want to surround yourself with the best people, you want to pay for these executive coaches. That's great. The most important coach, teammate, whatever you want to call it, is your brain and your brain function. So what I don't love is all these people investing and outsourcing that when the most powerful tool they have available to them is right there. And they're not doing the very basics to keep it moving forward and to keep it growing. Like, I've seen so many people who are insanely stressed out, and yet they're paying these coaches to teach them about how they can better optimize their business. It's like you have literally the most valuable employee right here, and you're doing absolutely nothing for them. You're working them to death, and in a few years, they're going to quit. They're going to burn out, and you're going to have, you can have your transformation journey about how you got so stressed and then you had to go back to the basics, but I can tell you that's where you're going. So maybe preempt the crash and actually focus on what matters now.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Like vegetables are not expensive. Sunshine, not expensive. Getting your feet in the soil, not expensive. Having sex, well, depending on who you're having sex with, not expensive.
That's a good point.
Like you said, back to sleep, not expensive. So there are things that we can be doing to take care of this coach or teammate or employee. Where I love that, of thinking of your brain as your most valuable teammate.
Well, let me give you one actionable because you mentioned sleep. So I almost always am in this scenario where people are saying, look, I saw this magazine cover says lose 30 pounds in 5 minutes. So what do you have that's at that same level? And first I would say that's not real, right? So that just isn't real. So you can go down that route enough times to realize they're just taking your money. Or you can come immediately over to where the science is. And I think if your goal is to improve your brain function, which please make that your goal. Please, everyone, make that your goal. That is what matters. Then the things you should be looking for are what works quickly and what is enjoyable. And I think this is where a lot of people lose the plot, because in the clinic, I can't tell you how many times I told people, look, you need to eat more fruits and vegetables and you need to exercise for 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And they say, oh, sure. And then they don't do it. And so then I'm left saying, was I unclear in my instructions? But what happened is they didn't want to do it. It wasn't fun. I mean, people enjoy eating sugar for a reason. It tastes good. And for me to say, oh, the solution is simple. Just don't eat the sugar. Don't drink the soda. They're saying, yeah, but I enjoy it. And again, we just lose the plot where we just have this assumption that if a person is given the framework for health, which is, as you said, the basics, they will do it. There are reasons. Some of these are defaults. It's very hard in some cases for people to get access to these things. And in many cases, it's just that people enjoy doing the things that they have been doing. So with all that as preamble, the reason I love sleep so much is that there is no single thing that is as quickly acting and as enjoyable as getting good sleep. You could tell people, hey, listen, I want you to exercise 30 minutes today. And there's a good chunk of people who will say, I don't want to do that, right? People know exercise is healthy. They don't do it, not just because they don't have time, but it's not fun for everyone to go run a 5K or whatever. But if you say, I want you to prioritize 8 hours of quality sleep tonight, there's nobody who wakes up the next morning and says, wow, what a waste of time. I feel miserable. If only I would have stayed up till 2 a.m. working on X, Y, or Z or watching Netflix. So the point is, it feels really good. And the second part of this is it works immediately. And this is something we all, I think, internally understand, which is, how do you feel when you've skipped a night of sleep? I'm sure you've been in this situation before. You're on the red eye, or something ran late, or even you were out at an amazing event with friends. How do you feel the next day? I mean, there is almost a hangover effect from not getting sleep. What that is your brain changing. There's a reason that people can't focus when they're sleep deprived. It is the effect on your brain. And you can look mechanistically at what sleep does. It's an immunoregulator, so it helps to bring down inflammation. It activates the lymphatic system, so you're actually clearing out metabolic waste. But all of that is interesting. The most interesting thing is that you will think better, you will have more energy, and you will be more effective at everything in your life. And you're just going to feel better when you do it. So with that said, I would say of anything you do today to improve your brain health, it's prioritize tonight's sleep. Your brain tomorrow will be objectively and subjectively in a better place. And you may not make the connection the first time, but again, we were talking at the start of this about what are the things that people need to know about in life. the one that I didn't learn until pretty late was sleep is the superpower for your brain function. And this whole mentality of I'll sleep when I'm dead, or there are other things that are more valuable, objectively makes no sense.
Yeah. Preach it. Preach it. One of the things I love about meditation is that it's giving your body this different kind of rest, but very deep rest. And so it's not the same thing as sleep. It's not a replacement for sleep. But if there is some situation where you have not gotten sleep, if you do the meditation, it's that you can feel like you have this flood of bliss chemistry in the brain, and it feels like you're more awake on the other side because your metabolic rate has dropped so precipitously. So you actually do get a different kind of rest. But if you sleep and then meditate on top of it, it's like superpowers.
Or it's kind of like when you drink a cup of, I don't know if you do this, but you have an espresso or a cup of coffee and then take a nap and you wake up at the other end and you say, I'm in the most perfect place in my life. I'm not necessarily recommending this, but it's something I did in training. Oh yeah, you take some espresso and then you just take a nap, and basically the espresso pulls you out of the nap. I mean, you want to set a timer, and I don't necessarily recommend this, but when I had very small windows and when I was doing a lot of hospital type work, it's a powerful strategy.
Fascinating. Yeah. Okay. And I mean, to your point of like, the very people that we're entrusting with the health of our brains and bodies are going through basically like boot camp of non-healthy habits.
Yeah.
You know, don't sleep, extraordinary stress, terrible light, terrible food.
No nature, take away your friends, take away your family access.
Yeah, and now you're responsible for the health of the collective.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think there are so many things that don't make sense about the American healthcare system, but at the end of the day, it's a crazy thing that we say the people who are most tasked with protecting health are not protecting it for themselves. And, you know, the bottom line is there's some weird hypocrisy in that where it's, you know, and this is the bigger picture, but this whole idea of, well, the reward is that you get to care for others. So maybe your life is miserable, but remember, look at this amazing honor that you have, which is that you get to care for others. And I think it's a brainwashing that I think works for a lot of people. And then eventually they ask themselves this question of, why am I not a happy person? Why do I feel like my health is going downhill? And, you know, just it's pretty straightforward. The things that are most correlated with long-term health and happiness are the basics, and you're not doing those things.
Yeah, and it's so sad. And also stress is communicable.
Yeah.
It's a communicable disease. So if you yourself are stressed as a practitioner because of just what we make people do to get a degree, then that is going to be communicable too.
Yeah.
So talk to me about brainwash. Like what is it? How do we do it? What does it mean?
Yeah, it kind of serves two purposes. One is to understand that we have been brainwashed in a very biochemical way by our interactions with the modern world. We can talk about this at all sorts of levels. So systems, our organs, specifically our brain, our biochemistry, the links between our neurons. And in essence, modern society, and not all active, I mean, I think this is a really important point. It's really easy to point fingers and say, like, Coca-Cola is miserable, you guys are horrible people, or, you know, Netflix is just sapping our intellect. But the truth of the matter is, I think it's just an incentive game. And when you look at what these companies are trying to do, they're maximizing profit for the shareholders. If they do that, and in the process, we get sicker and less happy, it's just kind of what happened to happen. And so we are kind of being brainwashed, mostly, I would say, kind of passively, meaning that these are not things that are designed to be super malicious, but the outcome of these higher organizational kind of design is that we are being progressively indoctrinated into doing things, thinking things, and feeling things that are directly counter to what we should be doing as far as protecting our own health and feeling well. The flip side of this is, like, we can literally wash our brains. We can literally clean out the gunk that has built up from years of poor health. Specifically, sleep is a great example, because now we know about this glymphatic system that you can activate with sleep that clears out metabolic waste. But you can wash your brain in other ways too, meaning you can cut out things in your life that are literally poisoning you at the level of your biology to improve your brain function. And I mean, this is the premise of it. I will say it's been interesting talking to a number of different people about this, because everyone resonates with some part of this, right? They'll say, oh, I'm a huge nature buff. I love that you talked about the value of nature to improve brain health. Or I totally agree with all of these companies providing just absolute trash food and added sugar, and that's the big issue. Or they'll say, I think it's the sedentary lifestyle that's killing people. And I say, yes, yes, and yes. It's all of these things. And so I think that is challenging for an era in which everyone wants the quick fix solution and say, well, look, what is the one thing that I need to do today? Is it stop eating gluten? Is it cut sugar out of my diet? Is it do high intensity interval training? And I think it's good to give people the options, but there's this very strange thing that's happened where we've tried to compress down basically the most complicated thing we know of, which is the human brain, into these binary systems, which is like, your mood is good or your mood is bad. If you do this thing, you will feel good or you will feel bad. If your dopamine is here, you feel this way. If your dopamine is here, you feel this other way. And the truth, and both the magic and reality of it, is that the brain is incredibly complicated and it is constantly changing, constantly evolving. And as much as we want to say, look, if I do this, my brain will be in a good space, there are so many additional variables. And the one that I will often bring up is you can optimize your food, you can optimize your exercise, you can get great sleep, you can have no stress. Is that still a brain and a life that is meaningful? And kind of the answer is still no, right? We still talk about purpose. And a big piece of this comes from the community piece of it. So I think, I go through and say, here are the things that you can do to improve your brain function today. But if you really want to look at the bigger picture, it is the connection that ties it all together. And so I think that is kind of the unifying theme, is that we've been disconnected. We're experiencing a disconnection syndrome. And the remedy to that is to reconnect. That is the glue that holds together all of these seemingly disparate points. And my hope is, a lot of this has happened since Brainwash came out, but that more people would understand the deck is stacked against you, but the way forward is together. There's this proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's where we're at right now. I'm not advocating for people to just do a crazy diet, lose 20 pounds, and then be right back on that merry-go-round or that Ferris wheel of poor health. What I want for them to do is to connect with this energy that is bigger than themselves and realize the deck is stacked against you. And there are communities of people who have decided to be weirdos, of which I'm going to put you in that list. I feel like you're one of those. I'm definitely one of those who are going a little bit against the status quo and against the grain to create lives that are optimized for good health, because that is being basically a weirdo in a society that seems to prioritize everything else.
It's flabbergasting to me that prioritizing your health or prioritizing your brain health is weird.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, oh, hello, everyone. Like, why aren't you prioritizing your brain health?
Yeah.
So, and is that the answer? Like, why isn't everyone doing this? It's just that the other things are so sticky and so addictive, and the incentivization of like making shareholders profits of the companies that are running the world. Is that why we're not doing it?
If you look at your body and your brain as a system, you ask, what are the things the system is most likely to do? And you can kind of predict what it's most likely to do based on the inputs it's given, right? So certain drugs are addictive. If you give people drugs, they have a higher chance of wanting to return to those drugs. It's not exactly the same, but sugar is something that has some addictive properties. If you give people sugar, our brains, our biology is set up in a way that says that's a good thing. Number of reasons for this, one of which is it's easy calories, one is it's been historically safe calories. But I think you can apply this mentality of basically saying our brains and bodies are doing what they were set up to do. Something that I think is really important to understand is our brains are not designed for us to be happy. That's not their goal. Our brains are designed to keep us alive.
Ooh, that's let's just say that one again. Our brains are not designed to keep us happy.
Right.
They're designed to keep us alive.
Right.
Okay. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So if you think about what we do, it is largely a reflection of these very kind of ancient systems within our brain doing what they're programmed to do. The stress system, which we've already talked about, is responding to what it perceives as a threat to our lives. That may not be a threat, right? So our concern about in 3 weeks we have to stand up on stage and give a presentation in front of our boss who intimidates us, we're probably not going to die of stage fright. But we have these expressions because there is a reason behind it, which is that we still make those associations in our brains. It's still how we feel about these things. And so if you think about some of these core programs, what do we have? We have a need to try to stay alive, which means we're going to prioritize certain nutrients. That's been co-opted by the food industry so that we are constantly consuming sugar, which is destroying our metabolic health. We have a need to feel connected and to belong. That's been co-opted by social media. So we get this surrogate of like these loose connections, which is I have this many friends, I got this many likes. That's just tapping directly into this primitive program. And if you actually go down and break these things down, everything that's going wrong makes perfect sense because we've created systems that continue to optimize not for our happiness, but for GDP, for likes, for, eyes on a screen. And this is, in essence, what you get, which is a world that is optimized not for health, but for everything else, which is why, in my opinion, so many things are collapsing, why empathy is going away, why political divides are deepening, because that's the way these systems want to go. You create rage, you create discontent because that's what drives eyeballs, versus to say, can we all agree that happiness or some variant on what that word means is the goal? In which case, we'd be doing things in an incredibly different way. But we've got stuck on the surrogates. Money is a surrogate. That cannot be the end goal. Even people who are money obsessed, why do you want it? If you ask why enough, they'll get to something brain related. So all of these things that we've been chasing are, in essence, surrogates for the real thing. But the further away we get, the more opportunities there are for things to kind of become perverted and to be thrown off the meaningful course. And I feel like that's where a lot of people wind up, which is, I've done all the things, I'm not happy, and why? It's because, well, you've done things that at one point seemed to be generally directed at happiness, but things got a little bit funky. I kind of liken it to, you're swimming to an island, but you're swimming underwater. If you don't pop up occasionally to see where that island is, you're going to wind up somewhere completely different. And most people are not popping up until midlife, and all of a sudden there's a crisis, because the things that I was told were supposed to make me happy have actually no bearing on being happy. Just because you have a wife, kids, 2 cars, a stable job, doesn't mean you're going to be a happy person. So there's kind of a divorcing, I guess, of our directionality with the things that, I guess, if we really drilled down, if people sat with it for long enough, would say are the things that actually matter.
So good. I like that idea of coming out of the water, like popping up. I'm like, where am I going? And I think a lot of people do that now, especially in this new age of this psychedelic revolution that's happening. People will do that through medicine ceremonies or or like doing something that creates a pattern interrupt and then brings you in some ways back to these ancient practices or back to the earth, or is sometimes an extreme form of brain exercise. But I'm curious to know your thoughts on psychedelics for brain health in general, and then what's happening with, I think you're studying them as far as epigenetics.
So let's start with the big picture, and then maybe we'll talk more about the biology. One of the things that interests me about psychedelics is that it removes the veil between all of these things that we think are important and what's actually around us. You know what I mean? We don't have to speak too many specifics, but for people who have used psychedelics, there can often be a moment where you say, actually, none of that stuff that I've been paying attention to matters much at all. And I can see the world for a moment the way it seemingly really is, without all the confusion, without all of the distraction. And those moments are really hard to come by in the modern world, kind of by design. Like, the longer you're in this loop, the harder it is to escape it, and the more likely you are to keep paying for it, right? So if you think about where are there pattern interrupts in day-to-day life, it's usually in times of crisis, sometimes opportunity. But if you look at, for example, habits, we know that people who have things happen in their lives, they get divorced, they move, that's when there's an opportunity to lay down new brain programming. But for many people, and much of the time, those opportunities just don't exist because we do the same things day in and day out. I'll come back to what I said before, 11 hours each day engaging with media. There's not a lot left in the day if you're spending that much time looking at your screen, looking at your smartphone, your tablet, listening to the radio, watching TV. So there aren't necessarily those moments where you can reevaluate. Psychedelics provide that. Looking at the research, you would see that for many people using psychedelics, they have these transcendent moments where they're capable of seeing the bigger picture. And again, you can get there other ways. I mean, meditation, is, better than I do, is a really powerful way. Holotropic breath work. You can just be in community with people. You can go on a long camping trip. But these rituals and these opportunities have been just cut out of our lives because from day one now, it seems like you need to snap into this grid and you need to stay there as long as possible. And if you do it really well, you'll have a lot of money and people will point to you and say, you've done it really well. Not because you'll be a happy person, not because you'll be, connected with the larger picture. If we're asking about how do you connect with something beyond yourself, I think psychedelics are the most objectively direct way to replicate that in most people. And that's really interesting. And one other thing I'll say on that is, when you look at what happens when people take psychedelics, it increases their open-mindedness. It increases their connectivity with other people, with nature. So there's something like almost intrinsic in these molecules. And I guess I'm mostly referring to the classic psychedelics. So DMT, LSD, psilocybin, where people who use, in particular, psilocybin feel a greater association with nature, with other people. So it's almost as though there is a reconnection intrinsic to these molecules that removes the distraction, remind us we're part of a bigger picture. And I think that's something that everyone benefits from more of. I'm not trying to say everyone needs psychedelics. You can get some of this just from being in nature. But realizing that we're all very small, right? The universe is very big. All of our problems are not as significant as we think they are. And there's more to life than just perseverating on these little trivial things all day long. So that's kind of my overarching thought on them. We can talk a little bit about the biology, which is interesting. I want to come back to one other thing we said, which is kind of like, modern society sets us up kind of for failure as it relates to brain health. When I was in my early training, we learned about psychedelics. So I was in Miami for med school. We were hearing about how ecstasy or MDMA was linked to these people's brains were melting. They were coming in from these raves. Down there was a time of Ultra, and Ultra is a music festival in Miami, but it was a popular spot to go and to use MDMA. And so we're hearing, oh, look, this is terrible things that happen. Psychedelics they destroy your brain. It took me years to understand that, by and large, psychedelics are some of the safest pharmaceuticals that we have for mental health conditions. And it took JAMA, the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, the top-rated journals on Earth saying, hey, for certain populations and in well-controlled scenarios, medicines like MDMA and psilocybin have been linked to some of the most powerful mental health outcomes as far as benefiting people with treatment-resistant PTSD in the case of MDMA, treatment-resistant depression in the case of psilocybin, that I had to realize, hey, wait a second, there's a lot of fear and a lot of misunderstanding around this. And I still run into people who are of the mind that psychedelics are just bad. And I ask why. Well, it's because it's a drug. And there's something fundamentally horrifying about a culture that normalizes known toxins, right? You can go into any store in the country and buy a pack of cigarettes. People wouldn't bat an eye. As long as you're old enough, that's okay. Even though we know it kills people every single day. You can go out and buy a handle of, whatever your favorite liquor is of choice. That's fine, even though we know it contributes to millions of deaths each year. But if you want to change your mind, we can't allow that. We can't allow you to mess with that. And so I guess I have a bone to pick with a society that still feels like this is a battle worth fighting. Like that we shouldn't be moving towards decriminalization, that we shouldn't be moving towards legalization, that we shouldn't be moving towards clinics being able to use these things. And even if all the research has been wrong, which it hasn't, why would we not try something when we know that right now there are millions of people, probably billions of people on Earth that would benefit from better therapeutics for mood disorders? And based on everything I've seen, this is the best data we have. These are the most powerful medicines specifically for people who have failed on other treatment protocols. So that's kind of where I stand on, I guess, the utility. And I'm not trying to say that I'm pro-psychedelic in every context, but I think if you're anti-psychedelic, you need a really good reason because people need better solutions. And from what I've seen, these are some of the best potentials.
So I mentioned a little bit earlier about this pilgrimage I went on this summer, and what was fascinating is we know that indigenous societies have been working with plant medicines for since humans have been around. This is not news. What was interesting about this particular pilgrimage is that we had gone to Greece and we were outside of Athens, and there's a beautiful book called The Immortality Key by Brian Marescu, right? And so it was just fascinating to see the actual institutions that taught us that drugs and sex were bad, turns out, they were born out of and birthed out of a lot of these rituals using psychedelics and using fertility rituals. And so these people were shifting their state of consciousness, dying before they died, having a pattern interrupt, and then coming back and birthing theater, democracy, Catholicism. And yet somehow along the way in the game of telephone, we've been like, oh, that's a sin, that's bad, that's wrong. And now it's the pharmaceutical companies, right? If you have one MDMA trip and suddenly your depression's gone, well, now they can't make money off of you from antidepressants for the rest of your life.
There's a strange thing, which is this need for society to kind of enforce this idea that now we've got it. We didn't have it for the last couple of millennia, but now we've got it. What you need to do, actually, it does turn out after years of research, you need to have 2 kids, a dog, you need to live in a white picketed fence neighborhood, and then everything will be fine.
And be straight and monogamous
100%.
And take your pills and go to the doctor.
And if things go wrong, which statistically they will, it's kind of because you're obviously not following the rules well enough, right? You're definitely, the solution is not experimentation. Definitely the solution is not questioning whether this is what's right for you. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that that scenario I described isn't right for a lot of people. It might be perfect, but the point being that, like, how have things gotten to the point where we just assume that we have it figured out and that we don't need to question, and that the version of ourselves that society tells us is best is actually best? Walk outside, see how people are doing. The same people who are saying, here is what a good and happy life looks like. If they can't do it for themselves, why are we all enforcing this idea that this is the correct reality? And one of the things psychedelics do is they show you the nonsense of all of these ideas that we've been given. Oh, by the way, that anxiety that you've been carrying around because you feel like you should be doing more with your life, that's not a real thing. You pick that up from, a generation before you, and these things that have been kind of transmitted over. And you can look at it with a little bit of objectivity and say, hey, don't need to bring that forward. So I think what you're describing here, as far as like things were birthed by opportunity and seeing things in a different way. Like, art is seeing things in a novel way. My sister is an artist. She sees things in a way that I cannot. She'll see colors. She'll see things in a way that just transforms the art that she creates into something I could never create. But in order to be able to see the world in a way that is different from what it already is, you need opportunities to make that happen. And the closer you stick to the line of the way things are, the less the chance is for these innovative ideas. And maybe most importantly for the average person, the less the chance of being, in my opinion, a happy person. I know some people who are doing it right on the line, and it also makes them happy, and that's great. But I know far more people who are trying to stick to this line, right? They're trying to do the sobriety check where they're going one foot in front of the other, and they're like, hey, I'm doing it, but I'm not happy, but I'm doing it. And it's like, maybe the issue is the line itself and not that you aren't happy. So I think that the psychedelic part of this whole thing, independent of the specific molecules, independent of, how they work, the representation here of saying, should a person have opportunities to do pattern interrupts, to question, to open up consciousness a little bit more? Absolutely. I mean, what is the point of life if not to do that? But this, again, I've heard this push many times, those are dangerous. Okay, great. Tell me why. Let's look at risk for basically negative outcomes from psychedelics. Let's look at the research. What does it say? It says, by and large, they're incredibly safe. Certainly, people have some psychological effects from these molecules because they are majorly active psychologically. In a controlled setting, when you're looking at these trials, the rates of significant side effects are so low. And if you look at the rates of people having major side effects, dying of psychedelics, specifically known psychedelics, not some sort of a mixture or something they found at a festival, the rates are really, really low. I'm not trying to say that they are intrinsically the safest thing out there at all. But when you look at side effect rates for conventional antidepressants, we're talking about 30, 40, 50% of people have adverse effects. And the effect size, as far as benefit, by some studies, isn't really all that much better than placebo. So not to knock SSRIs, but fine, we could not talk about psychedelics if there is a better option for most people. But in the absence of that, how could you not entertain the conversation around other modalities? Whether that's mindfulness or holotropic breath work, or if you want to do sauna and cold plunge, we're still learning about the actual efficacy there. But the point being, you can't just say, well, we don't have any options that really work all that well, but you also shouldn't explore other ones. That's not going to work.
And one thing that people are not talking about that I've recently learned is just getting off SSRIs.
Yeah,
like no
withdrawal
one talks
symptoms
about
are huge.
how
and no one talks
addictive they are.
Yeah, people go through significant withdrawal symptoms when they try to taper off SSRIs, and protocols and things are actually quite variable as far as how that's supposed to work. I know people for whom this has been a major issue. One of the things that gets me excited about when you look at dosing of something like psilocybin, how a single dose, same with MDMA, can have enduring effects. In the case of psilocybin, they've shown years later still a potent antidepressive effect, which brings up this question of mechanisms, which we don't have to get super nerdy on this, but how is it that a single molecule given at a single time can lead to changes in the brain that last years from that time? Certainly not the case for something like an SSRI, so there's something different at play. And not to get into, all the complexities of what's actually in our brain, but there's got to be this question of what does the reprogramming look like? Can we study that? Can we create other solutions that have that enduring effect? And if a psychedelic is, a 10 out of 10 as far as potency of something that comes directly from nature, is there also a way to use molecules in food to activate some of those same pathways, albeit at a lower intensity, but bringing a person to a similar state of brain health and function?
What's so interesting, I interviewed Dr. Maya Sheetreat yesterday, and she, has a book called Master Plants, and she's working with many, like both psychoactive plants and not so cacao, right? Like master plant, tobacco, master plant, not necessarily a psychedelic, but certainly a teacher. And cacao is an ingredient we could have in our food. It's like the nectar of the gods. It's a heart opener. Even black pepper, it's an entheogen, right? Similar to CBD. So I just think it's fascinating and I'd love to transition into food because I know that you're really passionate about using food as medicine. I would say that food is medicine. And like, here's something we're doing every day anyway. So we might as well be moving it in a direction that's optimizing our brain versus, making us sick, stupid, and slow.
I'm so glad we went here because, often we see like psychedelics are in one bucket and then food and nutrition is in a different bucket and then pharmaceuticals are somewhere over here. But if we're really to think about, kind of things we can all agree on, if we agree that food influences our health, hopefully people agree if they don't have food, their health doesn't do too well. They usually will die, right? And then beyond that, we say, well, there are certain nutrients in food that we know are essential to health. So if you don't have enough B12, you'll develop neurological symptoms. If you don't have enough omega-3s, your membranes may not be as fluid, and you can get deficiencies in these things. So we say, okay, well, obviously you don't want to be deficient. And then we say, well, could food actually work as medicine? And there's this big push, which you're aware of, which is this food is medicine campaign. The White House is involved with this. There are institutions, there are academic affiliations. And the idea here is that food can work as medicine, that food is medicine for people. And, I love that this is becoming a popular idea, but I had to ask, is this actually a new idea? And so I looked back, not at the actual ones, but at copies of these ancient Egyptian scrolls, right? And if you look at these like hieroglyphics, they're basically talking about, for this medical issue, for example, night blindness, we recommend that people consume liver. Why would they recommend liver? Well, liver is high in vitamin A, which we know is actually a major need for our eyes in order to prevent and potentially treat night blindness. So they were saying, this is a condition, this is the food that you need to eat. But of course, now we're saying, look, just like psychedelic, we've rediscovered this idea. What gets me is that now we're in a place where the reason we need food to be medicine is because the food we have eaten to date has been poison. So now we're trying to use food to go back and say, all those things people said about it's just about the calories, let's just strip away all the nutrients and things will be fine. Well, that led to crazy rates of diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, and brain conditions. So we're looking for solutions, and now finally we can acknowledge that food itself is medicine. But it's so funny that we're using food as medicine to basically fix this thing, which is food is poison. So I think that's an important first place to start. If you think about, though, the idea that food can heal, which hopefully most people agree with. If you don't, there are a number of powerful stories out there in books. I would recommend people just Google food healing, or I don't know where they should go.
Also, Mark Hyman has a bunch of books about this.
Sure, sure. Or read my book. Like this is intrinsic to the idea that food can heal the body.
And Brainwash, I'm just saying, Brainwash is your book.
But if you believe that, then you kind of have to ask the question of how. What is it in food? And some people say on the high level, they say, well, it's the carbs. You can't have the carbs, or it's the fats, or you really just need to maximize your protein intake. Okay, that's very superficial, but it's important. That's an important part of the conversation. One level down is the micronutrients. So we say, well, you need this many milligrams of vitamin D. You need this many milligrams of magnesium. And yes, that's important. But the thing that gets me excited, which gets to this much bigger question of connection, is if you ask what is in food, in particular in plant foods, they contain a host of thousands of these molecules called phytochemicals. Now, this is the level at which psychedelics start to come into the picture. Because we say, look, if you're to consume psilocybin, that's not a carbohydrate, that's not a vitamin, and yet it has immediate and direct effects on our physiology, on our brains. It may have immune effects, neuroplastic effects, epigenetic effects. Psilocybin is found in fungi, which is not a plant, but same conversation is, are there molecules in plants, in fungi, that have a direct effect on our health? Not just that you eat them and you don't starve, but rather that they carry messages from the soil that they were grown in, from the microbiome that was in that soil that gets transmitted up and changes our health? And the answer to that question is yes, that is what happens. But we are still operating at this very, very superficial level where we're arguing over how many grams of carbohydrates to eat a day. And it's like, yeah, that is part of the conversation. But if you really want to commit to it, and like if you want to translate over the power, the intensity, the knowingness of what psychedelics represent, you've got to get to the level of what are all these things in your food? What is the microbiome of the soil teaching the plant, which is then translating into different chemical concoctions in that plant, which when we eat them changes our health. So this is deep stuff, and I think it completely changes this idea of food as medicine, because we're actually talking about, if you want healthy people, you need healthy plants. If you want healthy plants, you need healthy soil. And I was talking to Dr. Jeff Bland earlier, and this metaphor came up, which is kind of like the human itself. We think about, well, we start here at the head and we end at the feet. But if you really want to think about where you start and where you end, you kind of have to add in the microbiome. And the second you do that, you realize, well, it's also the plants and it's also the soil. So there's like this vertical image of the human that's rooted to the ground, and these nutrients that are flowing up and down through this system that is a better representation of what a human is than just this kind of static collection of 39 trillion cells that we've kind of established as the human. So I'll go one level deeper here. What we're looking into is, do certain phytochemicals, specifically a group called polyphenols, influence human health? And do they do that by way of reprogramming epigenetic expression? I know that's opening up another can of worms, but
I'm here for it. But what's a polyphenol?
okay, so we'll break both these down.
Okay.
Phytochemicals, big group of nutrients, thousands of these nutrients found in plants. The best known family is the polyphenolics, right? And so you have flavanols, flavonoids, and you have molecules in that family like quercetin, luteolin. These are things people might have seen on the shelf in their grocery store. These nutrients, which are called polyphenols because of their chemical structure, are used by the plant as kind of their own growth system, immune defense system. It helps them to bring in microbes so that they can create those, basically the microbiome of the plant, and be healthy. And the reason that this is the case is because if there was a threat outside, if a grizzly bear showed up, it's pretty unlikely given that we're in Arizona, but if a grizzly bear showed up, we would flee, or we would fight, or maybe we'd freeze. But there are options available to us. But if you're a plant and you're rooted to the spot and an insect shows up, or it gets really hot, you've got to do something else. So what you do is you produce these molecules to basically change in real time your defense system. So you create these polyphenols. They give you resilience against stress. They give you resilience against UV light. They help you to detoxify. They help you to pull in the healthy microbes to create your microbiome. And we have looked at polyphenols as antioxidants. Historically, that's the way people talk about them. Oh, you get your antioxidants. But what we now understand is these are chemical signals moving up from soil to microbes to plants to humans that are influencing our epigenetic expression. So that's a new concept. I'll break that one down just for a moment. I know I'm covering a lot. But one of my big kind of themes is to get people to understand that there's really nothing static about who you are as a person. It's a nice thought. It helps us to kind of wake up and feel cohesive, that we're not actually just a collection of these trillions of cells and microbes that are floating through space with various conformations of atoms and electrons, that you're basically replacing millions of cells every couple of minutes. These are tough things to really grasp.
Dr. Srini Pillay, who I also just interviewed, he actually says that the brain, we think about it as solid matter.
Right.
He likes to think of the brain as vapor.
I like that.
Like gaseous.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation about that yesterday. But yeah, so what you are as a person, I actually asked him, I said, who are you, right? And that led to a whole metaphysical discussion. But if you were to ask what you are in essence a collection of cells that are linked together by energy, connected to a microbiome, which is connected to the soil, which is connected to the other people around you, in this hugely entangled web of basically connection, right? And so then you ask, well, what is modifying that connection? And how is data being transferred upward and downwards and, horizontally between species? And what we're studying right now is how these polyphenols may act as a principal source of data that gets basically converted from soil to microbe to plant to person, and helps to explain why, conventional farming practices and why conventional foods, which are largely stripped of these nutrients, may in fact be programming our bodies or not having the right data to program our bodies for health. So it's heavy stuff. We're specifically looking at one food called Himalayan tartary buckwheat, which is one of nature's most potent sources of these polyphenols, rutin, quercetin, luteol, and asparagine, and looking at how basically these nutrients, when given to people, reprogram their epigenetic response and their immune response. And so we're getting ready to publish a study, but we did show that in people who are aging faster than the average, that these nutrients brought their aging rate back down. So there's some really, really interesting stuff. And I know we've gone on a really deep dive, literally as deep as we can go into the soil, but we can come back up again.
Wow. This is so also I would love to hear your definition of epigenetics for people who that's a new term.
Sure. So epigenetics means above the gene, epigenetics. And epigenetics is the study of how changes in cells can basically be transmitted across generations that are on top of the DNA. And so the simple version of this would be to say that we know our DNA really matters for how we look, how we act, how we feel, but there are things that happen on top of the DNA. So if you're thinking of DNA as the hardware, we're talking here the software that actually is playing on top of that. And epigenetics is the study of how things that happen in our environment can change the way the DNA is used. There's the common way of looking at nature versus nurture is there's your DNA, and then there's what happens to you afterwards. And they're not necessarily interacting, right? You're going to be this tall, you're going to look this way, and a whole bunch of other things which are because of your parents. And then there's things that you'll learn in the world. But it turns out the things that you learn in the world change the way your DNA is being used. So all the lines get blurry, which is definitely a consistent theme, I feel like, in this conversation.
Well, this is like when people are like, oh, nature versus nurture. And I'm like, you cannot have that argument. There is no such thing, because the second someone is nurtured, it changes their nature.
Exactly.
Like the DNA is mutable.
Right.
Do you think, I heard, I don't remember his name right now, but the guy, he was one of the scientists who was principal in CRISPR and like basically decoding the genome the first time. And he said that the DNA, when reading the human DNA strand, if you imagine it as a 100-page book, that it's only like the last 10 pages that are fixed, only the last 10 pages that are the DNA, that the first 90 pages of the book are mutable, are the epigenetics. Does that feel accurate to you, or is it you think the software hardware analogy is better?
No, I think there are a lot of variables to consider, one of which is a lot of DNA we've kind of looked at as junk, meaning it doesn't do anything, and that's probably not the case.
That's
right?
like the part of the brain that doesn't do anything, like the do nothing
just,
part of the
just
brain.
hanging around waiting for a rainy day.
Nature just made a mistake.
Yeah, we just created some redundancy. So I think that's part of it. And then the other piece of it is, to what extent can we modify our DNA? And we're learning more every year, but this is still a very nascent field of trying to understand where and how does the DNA get changed. And so there's a number of ways you can look at that. Gets technical, but you're looking at things like methylation, acetylation, basically the addition or subtraction of various chemical groups on the DNA, or the things that hold the DNA together, which changes how the DNA is being used. But it's certainly a big number, right? If you think about it. In our study, we looked at about 1 million different sites on the DNA that we believe were potentially modifiable. So there are a lot of opportunities there in a given day to have your environment change the way your DNA is being used. And here again, we're looking at these polyphenols, which means can eating certain plants change your DNA in a certain way? And that's a version of food as medicine that is, in my opinion, far more interesting than just assuming that we don't want to run into a caloric deficit and we don't want to be deficient in micronutrients, which is important, but is certainly not the entirety of the conversation.
Yeah, so just to I'm going to pull the lens way out. Like, why would anyone care if polyphenols, or why is my nutrition impacting my epigenetics? Like, basically, if I'm really simplifying this, it's like what you are eating is directly impacting your health in real time. And not only your health right now, but also your genes, and then the genes that you would pass down to the next generation.
That's it. It is heady stuff to talk about genetic regulation, but I think you start with what a person cares about. Like, if you think about, where is the average person having issues?
Am I going to have a healthy baby?
But also, even beyond that, how do I feel today? How am I getting healthier? Am I getting more sick? Is my energy level good? How was I impacted by something like an infection? What we're talking about here is, what is the imprinting? What changes within your body when you go through life, right? So one of the strongest areas of epigenetic research is ACEs, and early life trauma, right? And how that changes epigenetic expression. And so
ACE is adverse childhood events.
Experiences or events, yeah.
Okay.
And so,
Which, by the way, just that's fascinating. If people have not learned about ACEs, it's like depending on your ACE score is almost directly linked to your addiction. Like almost all people who have addiction have had high adverse childhood experiences.
correct. Yeah, well, and so we know at a basic level, those who had higher ACE scores or at higher risk for depression, anxiety, addictions,
Obesity.
yes, in the decades later. And so there was this question of why. And one of the mechanisms seems to be you reprogrammed your DNA expression and you maybe have reprogrammed your immune system towards a more inflammatory subtype, right? So that matters because we know like that what happens early in your life is going to influence what happens later in your life. The question is, and what we're trying to get to the root of is, can you reprogram your DNA expression? So what works for stress, depression later on in life? You say, well, we have psychotherapy, we have drugs, we have retreats, we have psychedelics, we have meditation. Okay, great, but what is that actually doing? And so one of the studies that I really like was by Dr. Candace Lewis, who is nearby in Arizona, but they were looking at MDMA, epigenetics, and PTSD and kind of saying, is it possible that MDMA may work in part by, influencing epigenetics? And if you think about this, is it possible that you get these tags on your DNA if you have a really traumatic experience, and that certain interventions may literally go in and remove those tags? We're talking about really targeted, precision, personalized medicine here. We know MDMA works for PTSD, but how, right? And it may be that it is literally changing the way your DNA is being used. So interesting, yes, but also maybe the future of medicine.
Also, if you want to pull this way out, it's like, what is trauma, right? Like trauma is a response to an event. It's usually a fear response to an event.
Right.
What is MDMA? It's love. It's the oxytocin. It's the love hormone that it creates. So it's like, if you want to make it really oversimplified, you had a reaction to fear, and now the antidote is an excess of love in the body.
You could, yeah. Another way that I think about this is, one of the things that happens with MDMA is it allows people to process data with a bit more objectivity and reflection. So you're not in the traumatic experience, but rather you're able to see it and you're able to be in it without it overwhelming you. And so what if that experience of gaining that perspective was literally the psychological representation of the biology of epigenetics being changed, right? And similarly, if you think about something like psilocybin, we know that the transcendent experience predicts better response, right? So lower depression for those who get that really intense transcendent experience. What if that transcendent experience is just the psychological manifestation of what is happening in the brain at the level of our epigenetics? So there's some really interesting things here. It's like, if you really zoom in, the biology we're describing here is what we experience psychologically, which there's a version of this that people have used, which is like serotonin and depression. Serotonin goes down, you feel depressed. Not really all that accurate, but we know this connection, which is a desire to attach biology to psychology and then treat it with a drug, which in theory elevates brain serotonin. Hasn't necessarily been proven with an SSRI, but that's the idea. But now we start saying, well, what about medications that do work for these specific conditions in these specific contexts? And if we can untangle some of this, changes the whole game. What makes us what we are, what makes our brains the way they are, what makes us think in these ways, if it is related to this epigenetics, and if we know that there are things which, a really potent one would be something maybe like a psychedelic, but also maybe for people who have certain epigenetic events, it is a specific diet or it's a specific type of exercise that can go in and we know reverses or changes out some of those epigenetic marks. I don't think that's where we're at yet, but that's where the research is going. And it blows up this idea of food as medicine to a level that is so much more interconnected, because then you start saying, well, if certain polyphenols in certain foods are linked to improvement in X, Y, or Z epigenetics that improves X, Y, or Z health condition, what are the conditions I need to raise these plants in to optimize for those variables? So how much sun do they need? How much do we need these nutrients in their soil? What is the microbiome of that plant?
How much love do they need?
Exactly, from humans or from the environment around them. How much do they need to be connected with other plants and have those mycorrhizal networks that enable them to transfer nutrients and feel like they're in community? You get to a point all of a sudden of saying, wow, we're a long ways away from saying how many net carbs are in my diet. But again, this is where it's going, right? This is where the leading scientists are spending their time. So if you want to know what comes next, I think this is it.
So exciting. Okay, I have one more epigenetic analogy for you. You can tell me if you think it's correct or not. So, because I think it can be a little daunting if people are like, oh, I've inherited the trauma and stress from the last 7 generations. Oh, well, my great, 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 great grandmother was an enslaved person. My great grandparents were in the Holocaust. And you're like, well, I'm fucked. You know, I mean, like, look
Right.
at what I've inherited. I have
Sure.
no chance of being healthy. I don't want to procreate. Let's just end this line now. And so the analogy that
very
I have
dark.
used, it's so dark if you think it's
Yeah.
fixed, right? But if the supposition here is that the epigenetics are mutable and changeable,
Yeah.
then the analogy that I have used is that, okay, so the genetics, your DNA is the blueprint. Like
Okay.
that's the blueprint you were given, but you're the architect.
Yeah.
Like you could be like, yeah, oh, this is a 3-story house. I want a 4-story house.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to change it. I'm in charge.
Right.
And would you?
I think that makes sense to me. I mean, again, one of the themes that I have is that far more is within our control to change than what we think, and we are disincentivized from actually putting that into practice because there are so many systems in place designed to benefit when we continue on the same path. Every day when you make choices, you are wearing paths into your brain and they become deeper, right? So these are the ruts in the snow and it makes it much easier to stay in that rut. But
Is
we
it the
know
neuropeptide connections or just all the connections?
what I'm saying is, so you mentioned earlier networks, right? Brain, we thought at one point it was, okay, this region does this region does something else. It's really more, it seems like the networks between these regions that are the important thing. And those networks change dynamically. At a kind of cellular level, the strengths of the connections, the number of the connections between neurons are modulated each day. So you can have an increased likelihood that a signal goes from one neuron to another. You could have more synapses onto other neurons. If you ever watch these videos of neurons being formed and kind of some of these synaptic protrusions, it'll blow your mind. But the point being that the brain, just like every other part of our body, is in dynamic flux, right? This is intrinsic to what it means to be alive. When things stop moving, you are dead. So in order for you to be alive, things have to be moving throughout your entire body. Energy has to move through your body. Connections have to change. They have to reform. You have to replace cells. You have to create new cells. I mean, that is what it means to be human. And it's a tough thing to get around because it gets us back to the original piece of what version of me continues on, right? If it was a different me yesterday, who am I today? And you don't need a ego-dissolving substance to get to a place of a little bit of existential distress. But in that distress is possibility because you will be a different person tomorrow in every way, shape, and form. So yes, epigenetics plays a role in how we, I guess, show up in the world, the structure of our bodies, the structure of our brains. But by definition, epigenetics is the study of these things being changeable, right? So maybe you can't take off a mark that you inherited from your great-great-grandmother, but maybe there's a mark that is just as significant that you can put onto the gene just a little ways upstream of it that completely negates the one that you got from your great-great-grandmother. Or maybe you can take that one away, right? This is still what we're trying to learn. But I think just the promise of epigenetics is we started from this perspective of saying you get these genes and they're fixed. And now we're saying, well, that's really not part of or even a significant part of the puzzle. The truth of it is there's so much opportunity that you have to change every aspect of who you are. And epigenetics is part of that. And if you're on this team, which is to say, I'm team change, I'm team accepting of change in myself, then all of a sudden you say, okay, fantastic. What isn't open for change? And I think that's a place that is kind of an interesting place to be, which is you realize that everything is in flux, but in order to continue to operate in the world, you have to not open all the boxes at once. So that's the other extreme of this equation, which is most people, myself included, can only open so many boxes at one time. And if this stuff is too daunting to you, just start with one of the little things we discussed earlier in our conversation.
Get a good night's sleep. Just get 8 hours of sleep tonight.
There you go.
Like that's enough.
That is enough.
Change your genetic code.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, good night's sleep. Throw out those air fresheners. Eat some more polyphenols, less polyphenols, or we don't know. It depends on the quality.
Yeah, I think for most people more and diversity.
And how would you get, just tell us types of food. Like how would we get
them?
Top
tips. All right, how do you get more polyphenols in your diet? Generally speaking, top sources of polyphenols, herbs and spices, highly concentrated. So pepper, any other herb, spices, these are great ways to get more in your diet. Coffee, tea, wine, yes, red wine, but I don't recommend that for brain health. So I think it's kind of offset by the alcohol content. And then if you're looking at foods, some of the top sources in foods are just generally colorful fruits and vegetables. So you're looking at color because color is actually polyphenols. When you look and see the color, you're seeing the polyphenols. So try to increase the diversity of colors and the diversity of the foods there. Now, the flip side of that is eat less of the things that are very low in polyphenols and also just generally not that great for your health. So anything that has been highly processed, you tend to lose these molecules. So eating white rice, for example, not so good as even brown rice, but certainly not as good as getting a plate of vegetables that are colorful vegetables. And then the replacement that we work with is this Himalayan tartary buckwheat because it is actually not a grain, so it's good for people who are avoiding gluten. And we analyze this thing day in and day out, but it's actually one of the most concentrated sources of polyphenols in its class, which would be things like quinoa and rice and other grain type products. So I think it is maximize your diversity, herbs, spices, coffee, tea, and then do less of consuming the kind of white, highly processed foods that they're doing nothing good for anyone, but in general, that's not a good way to get your polyphenols.
Yeah, and if you're gonna eat some beige food, if you're gonna eat some sugar, then like just really savor it. You know,
I
what I
like
mean?
that.
Get present, get joyous, bless it, enjoy, like be there with it while you're eating it. You know,
That makes sense.
yeah. Or is there anything you wish that I had asked you? Anything that you're feeling passionate about that we did not touch on?
We covered a lot of ground.
We did.
I mean, I guess I would just kind of put out for the audience this point, which is we talked about a lot of things, and some of this might be interesting, some of this might be beyond what you care about right now. But the main point I was making, which is the most important thing you have is your brain. It is literally the single most valuable thing you have. So why wouldn't you invest in it every day? And if you don't, realize that you're going to wind up in a bad spot. And I don't want you to be there. I want you to be in a good spot. So literally every single day you have the opportunity to form a better brain. And it can be as simple as just getting a good night of sleep tonight.
Yeah, and eating food that is real.
Real food.
And exercising your brain.
100%.
Yeah. It's simultaneously so complex and so simple.
That's true. That's true.
Thank you for your lifetime of work. Thank you for this book. I'm so excited to dive into Brainwash. And if people want to learn more about you, where should they go? Where should they go to find you?
Sure. I have a very uniquely titled website. It's austinperlmutter.com.
Great.
Yeah.
So not doctor, just Austin
Just
Perlmutter.
Austin Perlmutter. Okay. I am Dr. Austin Perlmutter on the socials.
Okay.
And then if you want to learn more about this work we're doing with some regenerative farming and looking at this tartary buckwheat, bigboldhealth.com.
Bigboldhealth.com.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Wow, thank you so much for the passion, the intelligence, the many generations that you've inherited of brain obsession to pour this into this generation when we're so uniquely challenged with our brains.
I think that's fair.
We need you. We need you. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you have learned something. I hope this time has been so worth it. I know I'm a brain nerd. I've been learning about this stuff for 13 years and I learned so much today. So if you enjoyed this episode, please, like it, give us a 5-star review, let us know what you thought in the comments. And if you want to screenshot it and post it on Instagram, you can tag me. I'm at Ziva Meditation and he's at Dr. Austin Perlmutter. We'd love to hear what you think about it. And then as always, you can go to zivameditation.com/why this for some behind the scenes. And I will see you next week for Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? I love you.